Hey there, and welcome to episode number 154 of the Church Collective podcast. We are glad you're here. In this episode, myself and Chris had the opportunity to talk to the man, the myth, the legend, Paul Baloche. Yeah, let's hear it for him. Woo! I can't hear you. But it was a fantastic interview. If you haven't seen everything Paul has going on, go look him up on YouTube. He has put all of his training stuff on there. For those of you that have been at worship for a little while, he put all of his training on his YouTube channel just right there for you to get. It is fantastic. Go check that out. You can do that now and come back to the podcast, or you can do the podcast and you can go over there. I'm not going to tell you what to do, but we're going to jump right into this episode of the Church Collective podcast.
Well, it's been crazy. New York City is like a ghost town. And it's pretty crazy. Just today, just very few people on the street. You hear sirens and stuff, but there's an ER doctor on our floor. We just have a one-bedroom apartment, and right on our floor, he's not. It's not as intense and as panicked as you see on the news,
Sure.
but he's quite busy, and they are treating patients down the street in Manhattan. He's not freaking out, and this is a guy, man. He's got stories. The last couple of years, he has told us, just like your typical New York City shift from 10 to 4 in the morning. Like, yeah, I had a couple gunshot guys come in, and we had this, and it's like, oh my goodness.
Yeah.
So, I think sometimes there's a feeling of like, I want to do something, like all the Billy Graham people, they made a hospital in Central Park in 3 days, you've got that big ship that just came in up the Hudson. I don't know. So there's this tension of like, well, you're supposed to just stay where you are and stay planted. And that's what we've been doing. And my wife and I have done a few sort of worship, Instagram, social media, Facebook, kind of just like times of worship and kind of encouraging words. And yet, like these other people, they're putting their lives on the line. And so we're still trying to find that balance of what can we do, and also the option of like we could leave the city, and that could be an option too, where we'd have to quarantine. I mean, we all kind of thought a couple weeks ago that maybe this will be kind of done by the time we hit April, maybe, but obviously not. We didn't.
Sure.
No one really knew the extent. But now that we know, it's like, well, we do have an option or two where we could go somewhere else to ride this out, like.
Yeah.
Not like on vacation, but just like New Jersey.
Sure.
Go down to New Jersey. There's a little shore house that we have there that we rent out in the summer usually. That's my old age retirement plan. It's like well, we got that 5 or 6 years ago. We just kind of rent that out as much as possible in the summer, but in the winter there's nobody there. And but I know that if once you leave the city, they want you to be quarantined for 14 days. So.
Sure.
That's sort of meaning like if we do that, then we've got to stay there. So
yeah, maybe you give a little, like, I know I've been watching everything you've been doing on Instagram Live and just going with your stories and stuff like that. Can you give us a little glimpse of what you're doing for those of you that might not be following you? Guys, go follow Paul Baloche on Instagram, because man, it's just really encouraging stuff. Could you maybe talk about what you guys are up to?
Man, again, that feeling of what can we do? I feel like I said to my wife last week, it's like the little drummer boy, oh, rumpa bum bum. It's like this feeling of like, wow, look, there's the wise men, there's a king bringing gold, incense, and myrrh, and like this little kid. I know it's just a story, but that feeling of like, wow, I don't have much to give. What can we do? Well, let's try to be a blessing. We can just set up our little iPhone. It's so. All my recording gear is over at my son's in Brooklyn. All my SM7, all my good mics, all my gear that he borrowed a couple months ago. And so I don't even want to go over to Brooklyn right now. And so anyway, we just put up our little iPhone right there and hit record and doing about 4 or 5 minutes of a couple songs and a brief word, trying to keep it short, but just a little dose of, hey, we're in this together. We're with you.
Yeah.
We're all in this together, and let's just try to stay. I mean, stay upbeat in that, don't just binge on cable news, don't binge on Twitter, or you'll just spiral down. You'll just start. You'll just You'll lose it, man. Even I noticed about a week ago, every single cable news, my wife and I kind of went just for fun. Let's see every single one and watch it for 20 minutes. And like every time they go to a commercial break, it's like gung 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 gung. It's like all this super intense minor key.
Right.
It's like just it's kind of created to sort of keep you in a state of panic. And so just man, I've been practicing my guitar, just trying to create some discipline for myself. Actually going through this particular Bible plan. I also have a great an
Mm.
old devotional that I'm kind of hitting again, like a
Yeah,
classic devotional, like 25 years ago.
sure.
Loving that, and also setting up some co-writes, being intentional about setting up at least one or two a week, where I'm forced to like be thinking about songs, be thinking about something positive in the Lord, and get my head in the Word and picking up my instrument. It's sort of we have to like create these to be intentional if we're not like in the medical or some essential service. But those of us that are just sitting at home,
Right.
I want to do more. Than when this is all over, I don't want to be like, it was awesome, man. Like we binge watched pretty much every TV show on Netflix
Right.
ever. Like it's like, oh man, this is a moment in history. I want to tell my grandkids. So what did you do, Grandpa? When you went through that. Well, your grandmom and I, we tried to do this, and we tried to like take some of our songs and tried to encourage others, blah blah blah, as best we could, da da da. And again, we trying to look for more practical ways to. So I don't know if that answers your question, Ryan,
Yeah.
but
No, absolutely.
For my home church, we're doing like prayer requests, and it seems like the majority of them are all regarding anxiety and depression, which is kind of a side effect that I wasn't foreseeing with all this. And are you dealing with any of that? Like, do you feel, just being quarantined? Are you dealing with any anxiety, or have you dealt with anxiety in the past?
yeah, absolutely, absolutely. I'd be lying if I said no otherwise. I'm
Mm.
just kind of wired. I'm wired. I'm a guy that doesn't need 3 cups of coffee. I don't relate to the memes that are like, "Don't talk to me. I haven't had my coffee."
Right.
Man, I wake up. I'm ready to go. My issue oftentimes in life has been not being a good sleeper, an overactive mind, and I have caught myself in the last few weeks that if I watch a little bit too much of the news and I'm just a little bit wired, I notice it having an effect on me, and it raises my anxiety level. So I remember this years ago. Here's a tip: that fight or flight. If it raises that fight or flight, the only way to get rid of that is literally through fighting or flighting, like running, like physical exertion goes a long way to get rid of that chemical release of adrenaline and stress. And does that make sense?
Yeah.
Mhm.
So one of the things I do, we live, on the 13th, it's in an apartment building. And so I'll take the elevator down to the bottom floor and I walk up the stairs to the 13th floor and then take it down again and then walk up intentionally, slowly. I can't run up, man. I can't run up. Just walking up, man, I get to the top. I am so out of breath, but I'm trying to burn off a little bit of that angst. And yeah, depression can be defined a lot of different ways, right? But in terms of it may manifest differently for different people. Uh, malaise and that kind of thing. Again, I'm of the man. I recently watched. It's called Masterclass with James. So it was James Taylor who did an Oprah Winfrey Masterclass. You can find it on Google. And if you like James Taylor, maybe I'm dating myself for sure, but I love James Taylor. And he had a heroin addiction for years and cocaine addiction and ruined his life. And then in the 80s, he kind of went through rehab and he's been on 12 steps for many years. But it's such a good thing. And he talks about addiction and recovery and, um, because when we are anxious or depressed, we can kind of turn to things that are perhaps unhealthy at times, or things that maybe aren't extremely unhealthy, but they're just not necessarily life giving. Like if you binge watch Netflix 12 hours a day, that, I'm not even judging. I'm not judging anyone, or just all of a sudden you're eating 3 times what you would normally eat. He just
Sure.
makes a real good case, James Taylor, in that masterclass about, for him, part of his main thing of his recovery was what I just mentioned, was just getting out. Now, getting out and walking, moving. For him, he has a boat. There's, of course, he's James Taylor, so he lives near a lake, and he had this really cool rowboat kind of thing, like a kind of a cross between a rowboat and like one of those professional rowing things. But just physical exertion, he said, has probably been the number one um, aid for him in overcoming those feelings. When you have anxiety, depression, then you're more prone perhaps to an addiction, or you turn to things that can be unhelpful. So to really channel, and so that, number one, that physical exertion, find ways to do that. The other thing he said is he's always treated his work like a blue collar, like, this is my job. I'm a blue, like, this is, I'm a tradesman on a guitar, and it's wood and it's steel, and to get my hands on that, just like a carpenter would be, his hands on a lathe or something like that, or a tailor or a blacksmith. Or it was just a cool image that's really stuck with me about, if whatever your instrument is, whoever you are, like, just get in a room, an hour a day, now that you've got this extra time on your hands, and treat it like, like you're a blacksmith, you're a tailor, you're a carpenter, you're a kind of that blue collar tradesman, if you will, and pick up that guitar and play it, or that keyboard or vocal, whatever your thing is. I just thought those are two very practical tips that I thought was quite helpful from a guy that's very unpretentious and has gone through. He's been to hell and back. He talked about, in fact, real quick, I love that song. He wrote it when he was in a psychiatric ward for 9 months. He wrote, "Won't you look down upon me, Jesus? You gotta help me make a stand. You just got to see me through another day." Like, wow. My body's aching and my time is at hand. I won't make it any other way. Oh, I've seen fire and I've seen rain. I've seen sunny days that I thought would never end. I've seen lonely times when I could not find a friend, but I always thought that I'd see you again. Anyway, some powerful, that's such an earnest prayer, in my opinion, there, from a guy that wouldn't call himself a Christian, but he was just saying, Lord, look, Jesus, help me. I'm not going to make it. There's no other way to make it through this. And come to find out, in this interview, he wrote that while he was in a psychiatric hospital, getting off of his addictions. It was actually way before he even discovered some of his other harder drugs. So anyway, blah blah blah. I hope this is relevant, Chris.
Yeah, no, totally.
It's
No, because
amazing.
one of the other questions I was going to ask you a little bit later was, who else are your influences from the secular world?
Yeah,
There it is.
I mean, this is good stuff. This isn't like your classic Christian. Um, what do you call it? Classic Christian podcast.
Sure. Yeah.
Although I'm talking to mostly Christians, and
Yeah.
I am a Christian, but since you asked me, some of my
Yeah.
influences that are outside of the norm, I'm intrigued by those who are in recovery. I'm intrigued. I do this thing called Worship Circle, and we have these small groups. Men in my group, I have 8 to 10 men for 3 months at a time. Once a week, we meet, and these are worship leaders, and they're men, and then their women meet with like Kim Walker Smith and different people. So anyway, the transparency, the openness, it's really profound. And a lot of these guys are in recovery programs. They lead worship for recovery. I know guys that have gone through 12-step programs, and there's a humility, an honesty, a transparency, a no BS approach to, like, basically what the gospel is, which is the salvation. Like, we are saved by faith, not through our works, but we are saved by grace through faith, lest any man should boast. But then we work out our salvation in fear and trembling, using King James language. We work it out. And I think that's salvation and recovery are almost synonymous. So I'm intrigued by the stories of people who are very transparent. And there's a guy who's not a Christian, Russell Brand. Remember that guy?
Yeah.
But he's got an audio book that I listened to
Mm.
3 or 4 months ago called Recovery. I mean, it's kind of crass. I mean, if
Sure.
he's a bit crass and yet kind of brilliant and super honest. And I found it refreshing.
Yeah.
I wouldn't recommend it to like a brand new Christian or something per se. I don't know. But
Sure.
if you can handle an R-rated movie, you can handle um, some of Russell Brand and, like I said, the James Taylor recovery thing. I mean, those are influences outside of the, there's preachers and teachers that I follow that I respect, that which is almost kind of funny, because if I name a couple of these teachers, oh my gosh, just the mere fact that I've liked a few of their tweets, I've gotten people push back on me saying, I can't believe you liked that brother's tweet. Don't you know this and this and this about their theology? And don't you know this and this about? I'm like, oh my goodness. Wow.
Hmm.
In other words, come on, everybody. I'll bet you we've got 85 to 90% in common. Most of the stuff, our approach to life, our Orthodox Christianity doctrines, the way we see it, probably most of us are pretty darn close. And then there's that 10% factor that, if you're part of the Billy Graham group, there's a lot of people that feel strong about a couple things there. If you're part of if you are inspired by the Bethel stream or maybe Elevation stream, there are a lot of people have issues with some of their theology. It's like, I get it, of course, but are we going to wait until we all agree 100% before we just love one another, before we give our brother the benefit of the doubt? But like as if any of us are going to show up in heaven. Now I'm sounding like an old Catholic, at the pearly gates with St. Peter. I don't think it's going to be like that, but that's kind of the caricature, that when we get up to the heaven and there's St. Peter at the pearly gates and he's going to say, Brother Paul, your theology was 100% correct. Enter into I've prepared a place for you. But this brother over here, I don't know about him. His theology was only about 87%. So, we're going to have to spend a little time in purgatory for that. I'm just saying. I mean, I
Yeah.
understand theology is very important. So I'll
Sure.
get flack for that if somebody hears this. I'm not saying it's not important.
Can't say anything.
Exactly, Chris, right? But what I am trying to say is, man, especially in this season right now of, come on, we've got to come together. Come on, people now. Smile on your brother. Everybody get together. Try to love one another right now.
Yeah.
Or an old 60s rock tune. It's like, come together right now. So
Yeah.
that's a little bit of a rant there. I hope,
That's a great word.
I'm
Yeah.
hitting some of your questions on the
Yeah,
nail
no,
there.
super.
Or at
I
least
mean, you,
I'm trying to stay on track.
as soon as you said James Taylor, piqued my interest. So
Right. Talk a little bit about Behold Him. I mean, that kind of, you wrote with so many great people from, again, so many different kind of walks of faith or whatever. Like, can you give us a little bit? Album's been out for a little while. I know, like, the title track has been making all kinds of rounds, and I know people just seem to be loving it all over the place. But maybe just give us a little background on the album and how it's
Yeah.
been going and in this time.
Well, thanks. Thanks for
Yeah.
asking. It's again, I don't take it for granted. It's super grateful to have the privilege to release a new project with new songs. It's like, um, I'm just so grateful, especially after 25 years. It's like, I get to do this another time. Thank you. Thank you,
Mm.
Lord. And grateful that Integrity got behind this. And this is a 2.5 year collection of songs. Probably had close to 45, 50-ish type of songs that over the last couple years, mostly co-writing. Really, co-writing is kind of the thing. I say the thing. For years I've been doing that. I love the dynamic of getting in a room with a couple inspired ideas, and that person comes into the room and they have a few inspired ideas, and you spend some time, kind of like what we're doing here. Actually, the song Behold Him was written over Skype.
Yeah.
So I've actually never met the co-writer of the title track, Behold Him.
Hmm.
Is that crazy? And this was
Cool.
before this whole virus thing. It was just the fact that he's from Australia and I was in New York City. And so over a couple Skype sessions like this, that title track, Mitch Wong, his name is, and just a really talented brother. He was a keyboard player with Planet Shakers for a lot of years,
Yeah.
and I think he's since moved to Nashville. But yeah, so again, I don't want to just drop names for the sake of name dropping. I mean, for years when I started out writing songs in my local church in Lindale, Texas, as a worship pastor, where that's where I was for 25 years. The first couple years, just me and the keyboard player, Ed Carr, we just said, hey, we've got a little bit of time on our hands. You want to meet at the church a couple times a week? And he's a piano player. I was a guitar guy. And man, let's just maybe try to write a song that our church can sing. We'll take something from Pastor's sermon last week, or he's doing a series coming up on this. Wouldn't it be fun to kind of write a song that kind of goes with that? So we wrote a ton of songs, and a lot of them were just pretty average or not so good, but we thought they were good at the time. And you have to do that. You've got to write a bunch of songs. You got to get the reps in, you
Yeah.
know. Um, and we would write them and demo them maybe a whole week on one song, put background vocal parts, maybe like a little horn part. That this is before Pro Tools. This was a reel to reel that we had back then. But anyway, so the process of co-writing, my point is that when I would co-write with others, nobody wanted to write with me back then, but over 25 years, I've made some friends. I've made some relationships at conferences, and, that's how I met you, Ryan. And
Yeah.
so anyway, through that, co-writes with, man, let's see, Jason Ingram went to Nashville a few times, and Jason's been a friend for years and stayed at his place for 2 or 3 days. And Leslie Jordan came over for half a day, and we worked on a song together, and that was really, really fun. Beautiful, beautiful melody, great, some really strong lyrics. Um, and then she sang with me on that song, and that's called "I Am Thankful."
Mm.
I am thankful. And then the next day, Mia Fields, who's like, the wordsmith. She's just so good at writing. But Mia wrote on my album Our God Saves, like 12, 13 years ago. She had just come
Yeah.
over from Australia, and she stayed at our house in Texas, and we, wrote a couple songs, and now it's been amazing to watch, how God has used her to co-write so many songs with so many people. So that was a real gift to spend a day with her and Jason. And let's see, my wife wrote a couple songs on this project. One all completely her, For the King, which is just so really cool. And then a song called Marvelous Things that Carrie Job ended up singing on. And again, we knew Carrie when she was a background singer at Gateway Church.
Yeah.
Just a great young lady that we loved and believed in. And she'd come out to Lindale, Texas, and just spend the night. And it's been fun to watch her journey, and just
Sure.
amazing. So I almost was like, you think she'll?
Hmm.
I decided, let's ask Carrie. And same thing with Kim Walker Smith, that just on the title track, Behold Him. I thought, the song was done and track was done, vocal, and I thought, man, I could really hear somebody like Kim on this, Kim Walker Smith. And I was like, I don't know. I feel funny asking her. Like, I know her, but not that. We're not like best buds. So took a chance. She was so kind to say, yeah, I like the song. I'll do it.
Yeah.
And boom, she did it. And I feel like she just took the song, from here to a whole nother, just a
Sure.
another level, man.
Yeah, she brings it.
That's
How?
that's a couple songs, but feel free to ask some questions.
Yeah.
Sorry.
Yeah. I mean, how's the reception of it been? Like now that it's out, like how, like I guess, how do you feel when you see people on posting Instagram stories and like, here's my version of Behold, like here we're all like, well, what does that I mean, you've been doing it for a really long time, but maybe
Yeah.
just give us a little glimpse into your mindset. Like, how do you feel when you find
Oh,
that?
you don't want a glimpse into my mind. You really don't. Um, because in my mind, I still wrestle with all the things that a lot of us wrestle, any creative wrestles with. You know, you just a lot of self-doubt, a lot of second guessing, a lot of maybe I could have, should have, would have. Those words, you just wonder. Um, you're never 100% satisfied with the project. At least I never have been. Rita, actually, I didn't realize this, but Integrity on their press release, it was like, Paul's 22nd album. And I'm like, really? What? So I went back. I'm like, well, okay, if you include like the French album, two French albums and a Dutch album, so those are a little bit like recycled, but still, nonetheless, every one of them requires a lot of effort. And you're never 100% satisfied. You just run out of time.
Mm,
So it's kind of like, a football game. It's not like baseball. Baseball, there's an ending. Football, it's like, oh man, if you could just go like another quarter, if we just had another quarter, oh man, just another halftime, we could probably win this thing. And it's like, nope, the time says it's over. And so that's why a deadline is important.
mm,
If you're a creative person, you might have to create artificial deadlines for yourself until maybe someday you do a project that you feel good and then like, okay, I have to have the draft in. If you write a book, you have to have the first draft by this and the second draft in by this date. So when you're doing an album, it's like there's the date on the calendar. It has to be done, mixed and mastered. So those are the thoughts in my mind. And so, it's a delicate balance of I try after all these years to just kind of lay it on the altar and say, I've done everything I can do. You know that scripture, having done all, stand. I think it's in
mm.
Ephesians 6, maybe 5 or 6. It says, having done all, stand.
Yeah.
Does that ring a bell or is that
I don't know
rich?
the reference I mean, I don't have the passage off the top of my head if this is like a
Yeah.
Bible quiz, but yeah, like it checks out. I think that's in there somewhere.
I'm just saying, but I love
Yeah.
that phrase. My brain is like, having done all, now just like give
Right.
it back to the Lord and just stand, Paul. And don't,
Sure.
I have zero control over whether or not people are going to like it,
Sure.
respond to it. It's like, I have no idea. All I have to do at the end of the day is look in the mirror and say, did we do what emotional? Kind of gets me, I don't know why. That's interesting how that just brought up an emotion,
Mm,
but really it's strong because it's vulnerable, but because you're just like you're trying to put your heart and soul and blood and guts and not to over dramatize it, but if you're trying to create something you really believe in, you wrestle, you rewrite, you wrestle over every preposition, you wrestle with like, is that guitar too loud or should we bring it down on the mix? Should we add more vocals there? Is the snare the right? I mean, there are just 1,000 decisions that you wrestle with.
mm,
And then once it's done, it's done. And then you just, I don't want to be an insecure guy that's just waiting to hear like, oh, it's great, Paul. Like I want to give it at least 3 to 6 months to see if that to me is a test to see if do any of the songs kind of begin to show up on somebody's set list maybe or oh hey here's somebody did a cover of that and it's on YouTube, oh amazing, or hey somebody that starts to feel encouraging like okay, but otherwise at the end of the day look in the mirror and you just say did we do the very best with the time we had, with the budget we had, with the people involved? Did we do the best that we could,
mm.
And you just have to go, I think we did. I think we really tried to care about every aspect from beginning to the very final mastering. And then you just have to surrender it 100% or you'll drive yourself insane.
Yeah.
If you're waiting for, an attaboy or how many likes you're going to get on this, man,
Mm.
that's just we'll never be satisfied. That part of our so that would be I have to remind myself. I'm throwing that out there for anyone that might be listening, any kind of creative endeavor. But I'm
Yeah.
reminding myself once again, Paul, Don't live and die. Even those who are just leading worship on a Sunday afternoon, you know that feeling after you've led your 4 or 5 song set, and you've done 2 or 3 services, and now it's 1 o'clock. You're going to take your family out to lunch. And
Right.
here you are as the worship pastor, kind of a little bit haunted by that song between song number 3 and 4.
Yeah.
You took a little risk there, and you went and said this little analogy, or you spoke, and it's like, is pastor going to be annoyed that I talk too much, or
Yeah.
uh,
Hmm.
whatever it is, or was that the right song? Maybe we should have gone into this song instead. Oh man, did I miss it? So can you relate to that at all?
Yeah, I mean, it's interesting you bring that up because the thing I'm seeing in a lot of groups now and like friends and stuff is like there's a lot of people who are for the first time going online and now they're actually able to go back and watch themselves because that's not something that they've had and they're like, "Oh no." Like really just responding to all of that. But yeah, I mean that resonates. I mean, that's a great thought. Like you did it, like you did your best and you put it out there and you can't go back and concern yourself too much about it. Learn from it, but yeah.
Yes, you can do a Monday morning quarterback, or you can kind of look back and debrief, but process through the eyes of grace.
Yeah.
You've got to look back with a couple people. You got to look at yourself on video with somebody who loves you and someone you trust, and say, "This is painful." Believe me, believe me, I know, man. Maybe you guys feel that way when you hear your podcast back, perhaps.
Sometimes,
At times,
sometimes, yeah,
even the sound of your voice, you're like, man, I can't stand the sound of my voice anymore. Or especially any visual aspect, you're like, oh man, I didn't realize my posture is terrible, and why do I always blink, or why do I have that idiosyncrasy, that little quirk? All of us have little quirks, so it's healthy to look at ourselves on video, but with a couple friends that at the same time can encourage us and remind us that, hey, bro, or hey, sister, be kind to yourself.
Hmm.
Be kind to yourself, really. You'd be so quick to encourage someone else. We're so quick to encourage and to be kind to others. We got to learn to turn that around and give ourselves a little grace too, and be kind. Many, many, many people out there listening are really hard on themselves. I'll
yeah,
bet. That's
yeah, yeah.
my hunch.
When
So,
I'm
yeah.
around like songwriter friends, I'm always shocked at the frequency of how many songs they're writing a month, and how many they're actually kind of setting aside and throwing away. How what's your frequency? Like how many songs are you writing a month, and are you just setting them on shelves, or what's your kind of ratio?
That's a good question. Anybody that's back in the day heard my talks on songwriting, or the book God Songs, I talk about the greenhouse concept. So it's basically like you have this musical greenhouse where you walk into it, and you have plants of various sizes. So to the right, you've got a shelf here, and you have some plants that are just itty bitty plants. So the analogy would be like, you've got some song ideas, or just maybe a verse idea. Here's a couple verse ideas or concepts, like maybe a title, a song title. Like back in the day, I remember just, a bunch of titles. But I remember one day opening up my journal and looking at my song titles, and the title Above All just kind of jumped out at me again. Like, oh yeah, I remember writing that down. And I don't even know where it came from. If it was from I don't know, it could have been a commercial like blah, 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 and blah, blah, blah. But above all, don't forget, blah, blah,
Hmm.
blah, like, but just above all, so my point is, so sometimes you've got a lot of little things here. And then on this shelf over here, you've got songs maybe that you've actually started to work on with another writer. This morning, I spent a couple hours with a guy named Evan Kraft, and he's in Nashville. We're co-writing together, and we got a song to about like a verse, feels pretty good, and a chorus sketched out, and that's pretty good in a couple hours to feel good about a verse direction, a melody, and a lyric, and a chorus that's feeling like it's in the right direction. So my point is, Chris, at any given day, it's not like at any given day, there should be lots of song ideas going on at the same time, but they're at various stages of growth. And, it's kind of a little bit of a mystery. You just sort of led, you'd carve out time during the week to devote to walking into that figurative greenhouse and looking at some of these ideas and going, oh man, I want to work on this one, man. I remember this. Yeah, I got to put some time into this song. And so you pick up your guitar a little bit, and you just, and you spend some time with that and you worship with that idea. So to give you an absolute number, I would say it just changes over the years. When nobody was asking me to go anywhere and do anything, I was just a worship pastor of my church. I had a lot of time at home and I could meet at the church with Ed, and we wrote 2 to 3 songs a week and demoed them out. And, so after a year went by, we had, well over 100 songs um, actually recorded. That was exciting. And so, but then as time gets busy and all of a sudden I got another kid and I have 3 kids, raising kids, and they have activities and I try to be at those. And and then I'm also traveling to do a little mini tour, and then I got a workshop this weekend. And so all that begins to it can infringe upon your creative songwriting time. So I would just say, depending upon where you're at and what season of life, like here we are now, we're all quarantined and isolated. So it's an opportunity for us to sort of up our game a little bit and spend a little bit more time on those song ideas.
You got one, Ryan? All right, because I can keep going.
No, go for it. Yeah. Yeah, you can
Okay.
keep running this line. Yeah, that's great.
Here's a question. I think it would be great for you. You got 2 people in the room with you. You got like a fresh, 20-year-old worship leader, and you have another worship leader that's like maybe like early 60s. And what advice would you have for both of them?
Are you talking songwriting or being part of a worship team?
Just being who they are, like because we've got kind of both coming at us, asking questions all the time. The young ones feel this pressure to almost become celebrities, and then you have the older ones that feel this pressure where a lot of churches are kind of trying to phase them off the platform, like saying, oh, you're too old, so what advice would you have for those 2?
In 30 seconds or less.
All right, that's easy.
I feel for the young folks, because in this age of incredible internet media, every YouTube video of these amazing movements and bands and churches that have all the bells and whistles and lights and sound and production, it can be so intimidating. I remember experiencing that just in the beginning stages 10, 15, 20 years ago. You'd go to some worship, quote unquote, worship concert, and it was just like, wow, in terms of production. And everybody up there looked like they were, an LA actor, like from Friends or something. They just looked so uber cool. And then I'd go back to my church on Sunday morning and look around and realize we don't look like that. We don't have the resources for that kind of production. We're all volunteer. Our church is in the middle of Lindale, East Texas, like we are who we are. And so it goes back to that, Lord, give us grace and confidence to be the best version of ourselves. Let's just be the best version of who we are, to take stock of, okay, we've got, strong bass, strong drummer, our keyboard player's coming along. Let's get a plan to improve. Let's kind of get a vision to just continue to improve. First Chronicles 25, all the musicians were trained and skilled in music for the Lord, that kind of thing. Just give yourself a pass. You can't compare. You've heard some of these quotes, but comparison is the thief of joy. If you've never heard that, that's a good one to just write out and remind yourself. You can't compare yourself to Bethel or Elevation, or I don't even want to say names, they're being who they are. They're just, that's who they are, and they're being who they are. And you need to have the courage to be who you are and trust that that's enough. And so I'll just say personally real quick that I always felt like I'll never be that. And even when I did get to do an album, our church of 600 people, there it was, like, here it is, street release date. And like, our sweet people at our church, maybe I'd sell 300 CDs first day. Meanwhile, worship pastor at Lakewood, when Israel Houghton came out, his
Yeah.
CD would come out and they'd sell 30,000 the first day.
True.
And I would go, I had to just kind of make peace with that and go, I'll never be that. I'll never get to, that's not who we are. And I just gotta thank the Lord for what he's allowed me to be part of. And here's my offering. So it requires a lot of processing, a lot of spiritual, psychological processing to keep yourself encouraged in the Lord. Otherwise, it's easy to be discouraged. So I would say to that young person, first of all, if you're not married, then right now you probably have more time than you'll ever have in your life.
Mm.
So right now, man, just eat, drink, and sleep the Bible. Like, get around people in your church. Maybe get to the older men's prayer meeting on Tuesday morning. Go to the Friday night worship thing. Like, get around people that are pursuing God. So keep your heart growing in God. That's number one. The other side of that equation is whatever your instrument is, your primary instrument, man, eat, drink, and sleep that right now. Just if it's guitar or keyboard or vocal, man, make sure you're like every day putting in some time with a metronome, playing those songs. Da-na-na-na-na. So it's the heart and the skill. It's that balance. That's the equation. And just those are the two things focus on. Keep your heart healthy in the Lord. Get around a handful of people that are pursuing God. Stay away from negative people or jaded, cynical people. Just kind of pull away a little bit from them. And musically, just dive in, whenever you're watching a movie, even have your guitar in your lap right now and just make the chord shapes, work on certain chord shapes. So you're not you're not distracting everybody else in the room, but just the more you have that guitar in your lap and just making those shapes or you know, making those scale patterns or whatever.
Mm.
You get what I'm saying? That's how Tiger Woods, he'd go out and hit 1,000 balls a day. Your best tennis players, they go out and hit. So a lot of it is reps, man. It's repetition, repetition. So I would say that's your job if you feel called. Just keep it balanced with your devotional life, and that requires being a good time manager and looking at all the things that you're currently spending time in and being a little bit more just a better steward of your time. Say, man, I'm spending way too much time on social media. Instead
Yeah.
of doing 3 hours a day, I'm gonna just check it 10, 15 minutes in the morning, and then later after dinner, I'm gonna give myself another 15-minute window. And then that's it, I'm out. Like,
Mm.
all right, the guys who are like late 50s, early 60s, my advice would be, first of all, give thanks for all the years that God allowed you to be part of what he's done in this generation. Don't discount that we've had the privilege and the opportunity to be part of worship teams and worship leading, perhaps, and think about how good that's been for your walk in the Lord. I look back sometimes and think, what if my church didn't expect me to show up every Sunday at 9 o'clock and 11 o'clock? What would have happened to me at different seasons of my life? Maybe where I got a little bit annoyed or I got a little bit wounded by this church experience. It would have been real easy for me to sort of pull back and withdraw. And then maybe I'm just sort of like going to church once in a while. Then maybe I just like kind of, I don't really need church. I just read my Bible. It doesn't take long for that to happen. But the fact that I was expected to show up Sunday after Sunday, like there was a demand put on me. And I'm looking back, I'm so thankful that because there were seasons in my life where it would have been easy to see like, man, I'm just so fried, I'm burned out, or whatever, whatever thing I was going through. But the fact that I knew that in 3 days I have to show up, stand on a platform, and say, well, "Good morning, church."
Mm.
It forced me to keep short accounts. It forced me to deal with any kind of stuff going on in my life, a relationship issue or a sin issue or any kind of thing. It sort of forced me to kind of, hey, Paul, you've got 2 more days to sort of deal with this
Yeah.
so that you can stand on a platform with some integrity,
Mm.
some degree of integrity and stand up in front of people and say, let's begin to turn our hearts to the Lord. So anyway, that's one thing I would say to those that have been doing this for years. I'd also say, finally, these are long answers. Don't mean them to be so long-winded, but I would say, kind of see yourself as in the old days in football and hockey, there was a thing called a player coach. This concept of like the coach would still sort of go in and do some plays at times. There was a hockey player named Gordie Howe, Detroit Red Wings. It just sticks. He's just a name that pops out of my head. But he was the coach, but he also would go in and still do some playing. And I think we just need to not be insecure, just recognize that, thank the Lord for all that season that we've had, but also recognize now it's our turn to turn like the Apostle Paul did to Timothy and begin to intentionally pour into that next generation than the one before that. It's important for us to make room for that next generation, not be threatened by it, not be uh, insecure about it. Just accept it. Accept it. Thankfully, when you were 25 or when you were 32 or when you were 18, somebody gave you a chance to go up there and do it. So now it's others, their turn. So I think seeing yourself more in a role of a player coach, maybe you step back, maybe with your experience, you sort of begin the service. Good morning, let's stand together. And then you do this at rehearsal. Then you tell that young, less experienced, but talented, anointed 22-year-old, say, so listen, after we finish the first song, I'm just going to step back and you just step up to the mic, your mic, and go ahead and lead us on that second song. And then go ahead and lead us in the third song. And then when we're at the end of that, then I'll come up and kind of do that last song. I'll lead that and bring it to a close. So I did a lot of that sort of co-leading with next generation people. So I would say that's really important, man. Don't be leading worship by yourself. Get some younger people up there, co-lead, think team. The days of just trying to be like the guy or the girl, like those days are over.
What do you? What, this is a complete departure, but what are you into? Like other than worship and music, what are you into? Like, do you have any hobbies? Photography, mountain biking. I don't know what anything.
That's a great question. I envy some people that have passionate hobbies, like Brenton Brown. So the first song on the new album was co-written with Brenton Brown. By the way, just drop that out there, and there's quite a profound story behind that. By the way, he lives in Malibu, and his passion is surfing. Okay, so at some point in most days, he finds a way to get out there and surf for 2 hours. And I envy that in a good way. Or guys that play golf. I'm like, oh man, that looks amazing. That looks like that would be really fun. And when I lived in Texas, when my kids were growing up, my hobbies were my kids, to be honest. That sounds terrible, but because I traveled and then I also had a local church job, man, when I was home, I was like, whatever season my kids were in, I was in their world. So whether it was like playing Madden football on video games or going outside and rollerblading, remember rollerblading? Or playing tennis. There was a tennis court not far from us, and we would play some tennis. A lot of activities that my kids tease me, like, yeah, dad was the athletic director, because I'd be like, all right, guys, let's go. We're going outside. Let's go. Outside, let's go. And it would be anything, riding bikes. So now that I'm an empty nester, I ride my bike around New York. In New York, I walk a lot, or especially used to. Now you have to be, you don't quite have that same freedom right now during this season, but I love walking down to the Hudson and just walking up and down the Hudson, or the next day I'll take my bike right up and down the Hudson. So a lot of physical activity is important. And I recognize, so I kind of enjoy it. It burns off stress. And I also recognize if I'm going to keep, gosh, last year, I went to India, I went to Europe twice. I would just even flying to California and back, jet lag, all that takes a toll on your body. And I've said to my wife the last few years, like, if I'm going to do this, just singing and standing for 2 hours and you're doing concerts or workshops, and I gotta be in shape. Like, not
Mhm.
like I'm not a super fanatic, as you can tell. I don't have like muscles and pawn muscles, but I just recognize I've got to have at least a minimum standard of staying in some kind of physical shape so that I'm able to do what I feel like God's called me to do. And that might sound like, wow, Paul, that's boring. But because my hobby, here's the thing, guitar, like some people be like, well, my hobby is playing guitar. Well, I love playing my guitar. So I'll take my guitar up and I try to play that. I try to still stay up on piano. So I guess those are hobbies, if you will.
Sure.
Yeah,
Speaking of guitar, what is that a Collings? Because the headstock's blurred out, but
it is. Yeah, yeah, here it is. It's
is that your number one right now?
There it is.
kind of is. Yeah, I've got way too many guitars. You know, people are like, what happened to your McPherson? Why don't you play? I'm like, man, I love a McPherson. I love a McPherson, but a McPherson is like a Cadillac. It's like an old, 1979 Caddy, Coupe de Ville. It's just big and sounds big, and it feels the ride is just so comfortable and cushy, and there's nothing like a McPherson. But sometimes you don't want to drive a big Cadillac, and Collings to me is a little bit more sporty. I just like the size of it. It's basically like the John Mayer type guitar, the
Yeah.
Martin version size. So I like this size to
Are you
travel with
using
and
that
play.
in the studio?
Pardon?
Are you using that in the studio? You're recording that?
Well, that's very interesting. Gosh, you're such a good question. So,
Sorry.
no, that's interesting. So I wouldn't use that in the studio. I mean, I have. It sounds good. It's a really good live guitar. I've got a good system in it, a Fishman, uh, whatever the matrix system. So you've got the pickup back here, and then the element inside, and you can blend it. And
Mm.
I get a lot of responses from sound men, front of house guys going, man, it just sounds so natural. So
Yeah.
I like it. In the studio, I do happen to have a 1941 Martin um, double out 28. So it sounds crazy. I mean, it's crazy what time does to wood.
Yeah.
So I'm almost nervous to have it. Actually, I've had it for 10 years. But it's like, oh, you're always trying to make sure there's enough humidity, and I'm putting those humidity things inside all my guitars. I've got an Olson that I've had for 25 years, like a James Olson Dreadnought that was my main guitar for at least 10 years back in the day. So yeah, I've got some Electris, a Les Paul Jr. Got a cool 73 Telly, the 59 Les Paul Jr. It's pretty cool, candy apple red with a double cutaway, and it's not even that expensive, but it's just a cool shred type guitar. Um,
Is the actual 59?
it's a 59 Les Paul Jr.
Oh,
cherry red, yeah. Um, and it's like I said, it has the wings. Um, so let's see what else. Yeah, it's not a gold top. That would be like $100,000 guitar. This one would be probably, I think I paid $4,000 for it about
yeah.
5 years ago. So anyway, but I still play electric. I used to play electric a lot in bands, and but I'm a little bit more old school. Not a lot of the newer gah 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 gah. Bit more of the. I grew up sort of with Clapton and
Yeah.
Beatles and Allman Brothers.
Yeah.
But I love playing electric, and that would be sort of a hobby. Sometimes I just plug it into my little. I've got a '69 Fender Deluxe Reverb, and or Fender Reverb Deluxe, yeah. And that's all you need. It sounds amazing. And I just got a few pedals, Ibanez Rat, a Proco Rat, and an Ibanez Tube Screamer, NXR Dynacomp. Remember those? The red pedal.
Hmm.
Just a couple little toys. I miss that. I love leading worship. I'm so grateful I get to do that. But I didn't start writing and leading worship till I was 25. Pre 25, I was just an electric guitar player for Lenny LeBlanc, for different people. That was my thing. I just loved being a guitar player until my pastor opened his mouth one day and said, "Paul, brother, why don't you come on up and lead us in a few songs while we have a time of prayer?" I was like, ah. I kind of freaked out, like, I don't really do that. I'm a guitar player.
Gosh.
And yeah, he kind of pushed me into that. And so I'm no regrets. I'm super thankful.
When you're in the studio, how do you mic that? How do you mic your acoustic guitar?
Okay, yeah. So
Okay.
why is I have 4% left here. Hold on one second on my laptop.
No problem. I'll make a quick note. We can
No,
read
that's
it.
fine. Here you
No, I'm
go.
just saying. I'll make
Oh,
a
I know.
bullet.
I know why. Wait a second. Here we go.
It's that
I think
one outlet in the room that gets controlled by the magic switch.
exactly. Okay, good question. That's a good practical question. I mean, typically the rule of thumb is, if this is your microphone, then you typically maybe a foot away, right around the 12th fret. That's usually the sweet spot. You don't necessarily want it right over the sound hole, per se. Although sometimes I've seen guys, they'll put another mic about right there, about 2 feet from just a little bit outside of the big part of the guitar there, maybe right about there, 2 feet. But ideally, you definitely need one, maybe no more than 6 inches, 6 to 12 inches around the 12th fret. That's the sweet spot right there. I don't know if you can
Are
see
you
that.
particular about which mic you're getting on there?
Back in the day, there was like a Shure SM81 used to be. It's like a pencil mic, that was. But to be honest, in the last 10 years, I mean, I had a good home studio and all that stuff in Texas, but I just couldn't keep up. I went through, we had the reel to reel, and then we had ADATs. We did ADATs in our bedroom. My wife and I, our first home, it was just like a manufactured, just like a mobile home, basically. And in our bedroom, I had my whole setup there, a little Mackie mixer with an ADAT. You guys remember those?
Yes.
And then it got into Pro Tools, and then this and that. And then in the last 10 years, I realized, man, my life is so busy and so crazy, and I'm traveling and I'm teaching and I'm trying to write songs. It's like something has to give. And maybe that's a word for somebody out there. Maybe you're just trying to do everything. And I thought, well, all right, Paul, do you want to spend 2 hours trying to find a killer snare sample like, some guys love that, man. Or do you want to spend the next 2 hours like thinking about a strong second verse and like diving into some deep words and like trying to come up with a strong second verse? And I thought, that's really more my lane, would be more the lyric. And I thought, I'm just really not a techie. That's always been a struggle. So I thought, okay, I surrender. And now when I do a demo, I just try to write the best songs I can. And then when I have a couple songs that I feel like are worthy of a demo, I go to the studio, Flux Studios in New York right now. And so anyway, Mike, so to answer your question, it depends on, I kind of leave it up to the engineer.
Yeah.
Those guys know way more than I do now.
Cool. We're hitting like an hour and 15. So we should probably wrap it.
Wrap it up, yeah.
I feel like I could go another hour.
This is great. To maybe wrap it up, what's God teaching you in this season, Paul? Like we're all, I think the big theme is like you said, like we could spend this time doing Netflix or whatever and just kind of squandering the opportunity to be able to spend time with God. But I'd imagine you're probably doing your best to try to connect with God in a way. Like what's he teaching you just in these past couple weeks?
Man, I'm a broken record or a one-string fiddle, as they say. You've heard me teach this so much, that ministry to the Lord. You can just Google that. Go to my YouTube channel, Lead Worship. Anybody, and just look up ministry to the Lord. Baloche. I sort of try to unpack that idea, and I still practice that. So I'll go up a couple flights of stairs to our elevator room in our apartment where nobody goes, so I can be all by myself, and I can sing really loud and just, and I'm not going to bother anybody. In my apartment, I would feel self-conscious that my neighbor will hear me if I sing too loud.
Yeah.
So I'm trying to carve out time to still do that, to get my hands on the guitar, like we talked about an hour ago. James Taylor, just that physicality, pick up your instrument, get your hands on your instrument, get the Psalms, bring that up there, and just kind of, with your guitar or your instrument in your hand, read through the psalm and just put a little melody to that and begin to go from reading it to singing that psalm, ba-da-da, and then you can put a melody to that psalm, and that's all. It's very.
Yeah.
I'm trying to do that because it sort of checks a lot of boxes. It keeps my heart moving toward the Lord, but also gets my hand on my guitar, gets me playing.
Yeah.
So yeah, I'm trying to do that. I'm not. Yeah, and last night we watched The Crown. We started this series last week. It's called The Crown on Netflix. It's about the Queen of England.
Mm.
It's a nice, you watch one or two of those, and it's like, oh, that's cool. That was nice. It's not super intense.
Sure.
So that's what I'm trying to do. I just want to be a good steward, but also we don't have to come out of this time either as like. Sometimes we can set the bar too high.
Yeah.
Kind
That's
of
a great
like
thought.
when we set our New Year's resolutions. All right, I'm going to join a gym. I'm going to lose 50 pounds. I'm going to be killer this. I'm going to do that. I'm going to that. It's like, let's be kind to ourselves. There's this balance of
Yeah.
just trying to make sure we're checking what are those handful of things, right?
Yeah.
Everybody needs to decide. If you're a spouse, you got to make sure you're cognizant of your partner and you're being available and present. If you have kids, you've got to be present and available. Then what else do you have after that? What are those number 3, 4, 5 in your life? But we
Yeah.
can't do 12 things well.
Yeah.
You can do
That's
2 or
great.
3 or 4 or 5. You can do them well, but
Sure. Yeah, that's a great word. Man, thank you so much for just all of this. This is great. Just so good. So good. I
I,
knew it would be. I mean, you've got all the, I mean, you don't like hearing it, I guess, necessarily, but you got all the wisdom in the world, and it just like pours out of you in such a winsome way. It's great.
wisdom in the world with a winsome way. Wisdom in the world with a winsome way.
Exactly.
That's alliteration for all you songwriters out there. That's called alliteration.
Gosh.
Well, thanks,
Yeah.
Ryan. And I just love what you guys do. Always been a fan for years. We've done, the workshops together.
Yeah.
And last Christmas, that was amazing to be at your church and to get to work with your team. And
Yeah, it's
I just
great.
love your family and your mom. Just your mom and dad.
Right.
And Chris, you and I haven't hung out, but I just love what you provide on the podcast. You ask not your typical questions. Like you ask really deep questions, and that's one thing I've tried to teach my kids when they grew up was like, you don't have to be an interesting person. You just have to learn how to ask good questions.
Yeah.
That's good.
Like if you're in a social situation, don't feel like I have to come up with a really funny story. It's like actually you don't. You just have to know how to ask a couple good questions, and you really do that well, Chris.
Thanks.
Thank you.
Yeah.
I'm just a
And
curious
you play
guy.
sax. I see saxophones and guitars back.
Yeah.
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 Man, saxophones. You know what I miss? The last time we heard a good saxophone on a worship song was what? Here's a trivia question.
Oh,
I don't even know. I honestly, I hadn't even played saxophone in the worship world for at least a decade, and then in the last like year and a half, it just started popping up, and I kept getting asked. It's like it just came back out of nowhere.
Yeah. Well,
But what is it?
go check out. Remember, come now is the
Oh
time
yeah.
to
there you go.
worship.
See,
And
that
then
was
it
a while back.
modulates with
Yeah.
this killer sax solo. You're like,
Yeah.
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 So anyway, brothers, thanks
Awesome.
for letting me do this, and
Yeah, thank you.
thanks for the shout out. I hope folks will go check out the new project, Behold
Yeah.
Him. And
Yeah, we'll link it all and share it out and tag you.
do have a website, leadworship.com, and there's some stuff on there. And our YouTube channel. This is my final plug is Lead Worship. If you just Google YouTube Lead Worship, there's a bunch of free. It's all free. It's just all teachings on songwriting and leading
Yeah.
worship, and we go a little bit deeper than we did here, even. So,
Sure. And that
anyway,
stuff is absolute gold. So yeah, make sure to check it out. Yeah.
thanks for letting me ramble on here, guys. Ramble on,
Thank you for being here.
ramble
Cool.
on. We can name that band.
Led Zeppelin.
There you go. Ding,
There
ding,
you
ding,
go.
ding. All right. We
If
have
you
a winner.
turn my screen, you would see every 30 Led Zeppelin photos.
Nice.
Nice.
Oh, we could do a whole podcast on Led Zeppelin. Come on.
Well, Led
Dude,
Zeppelin,
wait a
the
minute,
worship
Totally
leader.
good.
Let's
Here we
see.
go.
Anyway,
That's great.
let's see. Anyway, we're kind of sloppy, sorry. Now I've reached that age, I try to do all those things the best I can.
Now we're in the bonus tracks here.
Yeah, I think we have our Instagram post for today, Ryan.
That's great. There it is.
Yeah. Anyway, well, we could
That's
go
so
on
good.
a tangent. We
Yeah.
could- let's do another one someday. We'll do Christians and classic rock.
Yeah.
You know,
We could do.
Christians meet classic rock.
Dude, that'll work.
All right,
That's
brother.
awesome.
Thanks
Cool.
again.
Yeah, thank you again for being here.
Be
bless.
safe. Yep.
All right. You too.
Okay.
Hey,
Bye.
bye-bye. Thank you so much for tuning into this episode of the podcast. If you haven't gotten yourself plugged into the Church Collective community on Facebook, we would love to see you over there. That's the best place to interact with us on one-on-one, but you can find us on Instagram and Pinterest and YouTube and all those social media networks. We can't wait to see you over there.